Well, let's talk about something that might have some even longer lasting potential impacts. And that is something that we have talked about a handful of times on this podcast. And that is the idea of a central bank backed digital currency, or the digital dollar. So, like I said, we've talked about this a number of times over the past, I don't know, year or so, maybe even longer. I have no concept of time anymore. And much of this talk has been kind of theoretical and an assortment of what ifs and worst case scenarios, that type of thing. And, we've warned about the potential implications of this sort of thing and how it could be potentially used to control society, et cetera, et cetera. Well, talk like that we have contributed to, has encouraged policymakers throughout the country to start erecting a defense against a potential digital US dollar. We'll get to that. But I want to structure this conversation in a way that provides a kind of a comprehensive context to this topic so that people can fully better understand everything that's at play here. So I want to cover what is the digital dollar, the worst case scenario type of things, how far along are we into the development of this, and how the fight has started to stop this before it really starts. So I want to start off with this, what is the digital dollar? And get ready, Justin, because I'm going to lean on you for this one. But this is the first part of the discussion that I want to have, because I think too many people, when they hear about the idea of the digital dollar, they think, so what? I barely use cash nowadays anyways. I use debit cards, I use credit cards, I use electronic payments all the time. This is essentially the digital money already, isn't it? So, Justin, to that point, how would you respond?
Right. So I think that the important thing for people to keep in mind is that when we're talking about a digital dollar, we don't mean a dollar that you can use digitally. What we mean is a dollar that exists only in a digital context. There is no physical version of it. It is entirely digital. And so there is no way for you to put it in your pocket. There's no way for you to go to the bank and withdraw cash versions of it. You can't walk around with it in that way. It exists only digitally. That's what a digital dollar is. Now, when we're talking about the dangers of a digital dollar, digital currency, a central bank digital currency is usually what we're referring to, because, and that's usually how news reports talk about it as well, because that's who's going to be in charge of it ultimately, is a central bank. What we mean is not just that it's like the dollar we have right now, it's just it only exists digitally. What we mean is that it'll be programmable. It will be traceable. It will be trackable. There will be a record of everything you do. And the people who are in charge of managing this digital dollar will know where you're spending your money. They'll know where you are because of that, basically at all times. They'll be able to set rules, embed rules into the money, so that if they decide one day, we're not going to let people buy ammunition anymore because we have a gun violence crisis, they could do that. And so you just can't buy ammunition with your digital dollars anymore, right? Or if they decided that, there's certain people are spreading misinformation, and they're using their ad dollars to do it, then we can just program the money so that you can't spend money on advertising of certain kinds of things. Like, you could do anything you want because it's programmable. And that's really the point, right? Right now, their banks know where you're spending your money if you're spending through your bank account. But if you're spending with cash, nobody knows exactly how you're spending your money. And so because you always have that option, there's limits to what people can do. And because your money is with private banks and not with, say, the Federal Reserve or with some the U.S. Treasury or something like that, which is how a central bank digital currency would work, that's where it would be hosted. The government doesn't automatically know where you're spending your money. If they want access to your bank account records, the bank has to give it to them. Sometimes there has to be warrants and things like that in order to make that happen. So the danger of a digital dollar is, from a privacy and civil liberties perspective, it's that you would have no privacy. You would have no way of escaping that problem. everything you do, everywhere you go, would be traced and tracked, and the money could be controlled so that you can't use it in a way that the people in charge decide they don't like, even if it would otherwise be a lawful activity. They can turn it off in that way. And then from a economic standpoint, what's really bad about this is obviously if you can just create money by pushing a button, then it becomes really easy to just push that button whenever the government wants to create money. Right now, they're already creating tons and tons and tons of money. We know that. But as crazy as it sounds, it would be even easier for them to do that with a digital currency. And then you could also tie rules to it. So let's say they wanted to increase spending, but they just can't get people to spend money. They lower interest rates, but they just can't get people to go out and get loans and spend money. But they need to boost the economy. Okay, well, then they could set a rule to the digital dollar that says if you don't spend a certain percentage of the amount of digital dollars you have, they're going to start disappearing. Like they could do that if they wanted. And because it's programmable and because it would be controlled and hosted by these authorities, there's really no end to the amount of crazy schemes that you could dream up. The point is we don't want to give them the power to do any of these things. And I think that there are a lot of both liberals and conservatives that don't like the idea of the government knowing every single thing that they spend money on a daily basis and wanting the government to have rules that control all of that. So that's what a digital currency is when we're talking about a digital dollar.
So Jim, I know you just heard crazy Justin Haskins ranting about conspiracy theories again, but don't listen to him. I'm going to give you the official story about the digital dollar. All right, so don't listen to him. Let me quell your fears real quick, Jim. So, I think another thing that people think of when they hear of digital dollars is that they think it's like cryptocurrency, and this is also not the case. Cryptocurrency is a terrible thing for terrible people that want to hide their transactions and commit crimes essentially by using that money. That's not the case. All right. This is actually very much a digital dollar is actually kind of the opposite of cryptocurrencies in many respects. Cryptocurrencies are very specifically designed to be decentralized. You know what else is decentralized, Jim? Bad stuff. You know what's centralized? Good stuff. And that's what CBDCs are. They're very centralized. The central bank that backs the digital currency would have all sorts of controls over the currency. So, these are some other things that a CBDC could help facilitate. Listen to all of these different benefits. These come from these people that are advocating for this. That's me. A more efficient and secure digital payments. Doesn't that sound great? Increased financial inclusion, because, there's a lot of people that can't get bank accounts. So this would allow everyone to be included in the financial system. Improved monetary policy transmission, right? Because, different airdrops of money or taking money out of people's accounts becomes a lot easier. That's a good thing. Remember, that's a good thing. Help prevent criminal activity. I mean, Jim, do you want more criminal activity? So you should be in favor of this. And to quote a gentleman from the Bank of International Settlements, this is August Carstens, he says, "We don't know who's using a $100 bill today, and we don't know who's using a $1,000 peso bill today. The key difference with a CBDC is that the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability, and also we will have the technology to enforce that." Don't you feel more comfortable about this than, all the crazy stuff Justin was saying, Jim? What do you think?
That's what I think. I don't like any of that at all. Look, so yeah, I'm a little bit new to this. I've been doing some reading, but you guys, I know Donnie and Justin have been talking about this subject a lot, but it sounds like ESG, except kind of like in the retail space. In other words, it's closer to the people than ESG, so mandating that companies passing regulations or rules that you can't, or, they're trying to do it through the private sector with ESG, saying, okay, you can't invest in fossil fuel companies, you can't invest in gun companies, you can't invest in all these things. And now, so that's not enough power for these power mad lefties. Now we have to determine how you as an individual can spend and invest your money as well, but even down to the spending level. And so it's always about social control. And it's always about less freedom. So I've heard it described that if a global digital currency ever comes to pass, and I really do think it's inevitable. I mean, maybe not this year, certainly not this year, maybe not in 5 years, But in 20, 30 years, I would think that's an easy estimate to say that a global digital currency controlled by some global bank or series of banks is an inevitability. And it's always about controlling the populace. Like these power mad lefties who run our banks, who run all of our governments, who implement these so-called treaties on climate change and other things, just cannot abide people having freedom to spend money as they wish, to live where they wish, to live how they wish, to invest in companies they think are good and will make them a profit. All of these things have to come to an end. The ultimate aim of the people that are pushing these things is complete domination over your life. And if you were given any bit of freedom, you are a problem. And if you insist upon your freedom, you're an even bigger problem. And perhaps we need more jails for those sorts of people.
Yeah, Justin, you already kind of mentioned the smart contract thing, but I do want to elaborate on that a little bit as we do kind of move into the worst case scenarios when it comes to a digital dollar plan like this.
Well, Donnie, can I make one quick comment?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I would be in favor of a digital dollar if it would make it easier to track Hunter Biden's money from China to the United States. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that somehow, some way, we wouldn't have access to that kind of, information. So therefore, I've totally changed my mind, and now I'm totally anti-digital dollar.
I think he's using the digital yuan, so I'm not really sure.
That's true.
That's true. Silly me.
So the idea of smart contracts originated in the cryptocurrency field, and it does allow for some very interesting use cases for cryptocurrency or currency in general. The money itself, as Justin said, can be programmed to let's say transfer into another person's account as soon as a different condition is met, and this allows for greater efficiency. It can cut out middlemen in a lot of cases. It can cut out the need for banks in certain cases. So it's a really interesting development in the cryptocurrency field, the type of currency that's decentralized and not controlled by any specific person. But again, when it's controlled by a central bank or government, this sort of power should concern you. I'll drop all the sarcasm for this part of the show, but it should really concern you. And, we've talked about some of these things in the past. Justin already went over a couple of examples. But let's say, for example, welfare payments or different stimulus checks or maybe a future PPP loan, next time there's a pandemic that rolls around. That money could have digital strings attached to it to dictate how and when that money is spent. That's what this allows this to do. And, I'm sure that you can find some good examples of this. And, food stamp money is programmed to only be spent on food. Great. I think that's probably a good thing. But, just let your mind wander and imagine some of the things that the government could restrict your money from doing. Perhaps the next stimulus money that you get can only be spent on things the government says are essential, during the next pandemic, or your next PPP loan can only be spent in certain ways or on firms that have a high ESG score. Or maybe policymakers decide that any money that comes from the government directly or indirectly should have some digital strings attached to it that prevents you from buying anything that has one of those firearm tags attached to it that we've talked about in previous episodes. And then there was a article that somebody shared with me that was from Time Magazine. I don't think I have this in the show notes, Andy, but from Time Magazine, and it's titled "How You Can Calculate Your Grocery List's Carbon Footprint." So in this article, the author talks about this tool that was released by a Swedish climate intelligence company called Carbon Cloud that calculates the greenhouse gas emissions of a large number of items that you buy at the grocery store. The stated intent of this technology is to provide insight for your consumers to see what their carbon footprint is when they're shopping for groceries. Apparently, you're supposed to shriek in fear when you pick up a box of Pop-Tarts and see that it contributes 4 kilograms of CO2 in the atmosphere. And instead, pick up a carrot that only gives 0.02 kilograms of CO2. And my thought immediately went to this whole digital dollar thing. And it's very possible that this sort of tool can be worked into a digital currency to facilitate a policy that would limit the amount of kilograms of CO2 that you're allowed to purchase when shopping. In the same way that like a firearm purchase could have that tag attributed to it, so could every product. And it could have attached to it a carbon price tag. And this metadata could be cataloged against your account in a way to determine whether or not you've reached your spending ceiling when it comes to your carbon footprint. I mean, could you imagine, in a day where we didn't have this technology and everyone's just spending dollars, you get a paycheck and you just have your bank account? Could you imagine how many IRS or like EPA auditors it would take to track down this sort of thing in the past? It would be absolutely impossible to do. But now with current technology, this is very possible, and very possible with very little human interaction. It could all be AI and algorithm. All of that stuff could be taken care of. So that type of like granular policy, like Jim was saying, on like an individual basis of how you act as a consumer, can be controlled with this sort of technology. Justin, you want to add on anything with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there really is no end to the way that you could use a central bank digital currency. I mean, it really is, in a lot of ways, just the end of freedom. I mean, I think if you're just going to do shorthand, there really is no way that you could possibly have a free society with a central bank digital currency, unless there were rules embedded in the central bank digital currency that made it, effectively like a Bitcoin or something like that, where it's decentralized and it's all this other stuff. But they're never going to do that. We already know that. The other thing is that Donnie alluded to this earlier, but there has been lots and lots and lots of information put out by the Biden administration. People don't really know this, but lots of information put out by the Biden administration suggesting what sorts of things they're going to include in it. Donnie mentioned earlier that there's the talk about financial inclusion and equity and stuff like that. That's all in Biden administration reports, executive orders, comments to the press, etc. They've said over and over and over again, a central bank digital currency should be designed to promote financial inclusion, to promote equity, to battle climate change, to limit pollution, to attack organized crime, etc. Well, how can any of that happen unless it's programmable and they can spy on it on every transaction and they can set rules to make that happen? I mean, it has to be exactly the way that we're describing it in order for any of this to make any sense at all these promises they're making. They also included numerous stakeholders involved in the process, including organized labor, activist groups, environmental groups, etc. This is what they've said. The Biden administration has said we're doing this. They put executive order in place in March of last year, calling for a government-wide study of central bank digital currencies. They released those reports in September of 2022, saying we're going to keep studying it further, but here's the policy objectives we have for a CBDC. And then they, after doing that, directed all these different heads of various agencies, including the Treasury Department and others, to work together with the Federal Reserve to help develop a central bank digital currency. I mean, this thing, there couldn't be more evidence that this is actually happening and that it is going to be programmable and that you are going to lose your freedom and privacy as a result of it. They couldn't be clearer about what they want to do.
Yeah. So, Jim, you already mentioned this, but Justin and I have been kind of wrapped up in this for the last several months. So, apologies for all those people waiting for the next Jim rant or, Chris segment or something like that. But if you guys want to jump in at any time, jump in. But I do want to keep this.
Okay. Well, real quick, I do have a comment I need to make. So as of right now, I'm with Bank of America, and contacting a Bank of America customer service representative without going into a branch is literally impossible. Could you imagine how difficult it would be if there was any sort of error in your digital, wallet account? Who would you contact? The digital wallet, service?
You have to call up. You have to call
330 Americans are all going to be calling the same number, constantly. Hi, why is my account, 1,000?
You have to call Jerome Powell. You have to call him up.
Maybe Janet Yellen. Maybe her personal cell phone number will be given all of us. I mean, I don't know, but it's just
one other thing.
Those are the kind of things that they just don't even consider, which, as anyone knows, is going to cause huge problems. Donnie, I don't want to keep going on this, but when they were rolling out Obamacare, do you remember how horrible the website was? How it wasn't even working? They had years to do that. Can you imagine how horrible the platform or website would be for this monstrosity? It's just please, the government can't build a website for you to sign up for a healthcare plan. I don't want them building a platform, website, whatever you want to call it, with all the financial transactions and all the account histories of everyone in the entire country. Like, give me this is insane.
Go
or
ahead,
as
Jim.
Jim would like, it's inane.
That's right. So, I put this in the private chat. I just wanted to be clear on it. I'll share it with everybody listening right here too. It's like, this sounds like that social credit system from China that you guys have been talking about, and how, ESG was kind of a way it is kind of an imposition of a social credit system on on your mutual fund, say. But this is a way, and of course, China can impose a social credit system because they're culturally and politically, they're a totalitarian society, and their people they have no choice. They have to put up with it. And so it's not necessarily tied to their money, but they have to participate in a social credit system in order to operate in their society. This is a way to impose a social credit system on the free West, and especially the United States, through the back door, and through controlling the only way we can spend money, which is how you live. And that's what this is really about. And like, I guess, I said it in the beginning, that this is about controlling the way you live, because you don't live. Everybody listening to this podcast, and most people that in the United States, are not living in the way that our global elites want us to live. They so admire China. Look how much control they have over their people. Well, yeah, if you're a totalitarian, oppressive society and you put people in jail for speaking up against them, yeah, it's pretty easy to control the people. It's a little harder to do in the West, and this is the way it's done through this digital currency.
Yeah, this seriously makes the China social credit score thing seem like child's play. Like, that was the old way of doing it. When I mean old way, I mean like 3 years ago. This is the new way. And just, in case people think that this is still like theoretical, like there are, I think I mentioned in the last episode when we very briefly touched on this, that there's 100 countries working on a CBDC program. Well, according to the Atlantic Council, who has a website that's dedicated to tracking the central bank digital currency programs, there is 114 countries that are pursuing this as of December of last year. And this includes countries that have launched programs, including like the Bahamas or something. Countries that have started a pilot program, including China, South Africa, South Korea, the United Arab Emirates, and Ukraine, which is kind of interesting. Countries that are developing it, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, Japan, and countries that are in the research phase, which includes the UK, Mexico, and the United States. And we've also covered on this show, I think about a year ago now, Biden signing an executive order that would require a number of government agencies to provide insight from their perspective of how a CBDC would work. So a lot of this is currently in motion. But Justin, there was a very interesting development just recently on the state level. So Justin calls me up one day. This is probably, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, telling me about the UCC, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. And this is a piece of legislation that is passed and updated separately in all 50 states in an effort to ensure that the rules that are in place to regulate various commercial activities remain consistent in all states. And apparently this UCC thing is updated from time to time, and it's usually just a rubber stamp affair for legislative officials. There's really no debate or friction at all. It's just like, oh yeah, update to this thing that no one cares about. Great, stamp it. It's now law. Well, apparently the most recent update to this UCC contains language that appears to be setting the stage for a digital currency. This mostly went unnoticed because, like I said, the UCC update is not something that's usually controversial. But unfortunately for the advocates of the digital dollar, Justin found out about this. So, Justin, am I mostly right in my explanation of this UCC thing, or feel free to fill in the gaps?
Yeah, the Uniform Commercial Code gets updated every several years or so. It takes them years to put it together. It's put together by lawyers who work at a few nonprofit organizations that are dedicated mainly just to this. And there's a lot of good stuff in the UCC. It's important that we have a UCC, and it's a really good federalism thing because it's not a federal law, it's a state law, and all the states pass it. And so there's a lot of good stuff related to this. But in the most recent version of the UCC, they added stuff in that redefine the definition of money so that specifically money was whatever the government says money is, unless the government says that it's a cryptocurrency. in which case it's not money, even though the government says it's money. So if the United States government came out tomorrow and said Bitcoin is the official currency of the United States, according to this commercial code, the updated version of it, it wouldn't be money, even though the government says that it's money. And otherwise, it would be considered money, but in this case, it wouldn't. And that caused a lot of people to say, it turns out that that's actually not really the most important part of the story, but that caused a lot of people that raised a lot of red flags saying, why would they even do that? And when we started digging into it more, what we found was that there's all sorts of things that in both the existing code and the amendments that are being proposed that would, in effect, make it easy for a central bank digital currency, which has not been created yet officially, right, to be utilized in a bunch of different kinds of commercial transactions. So stuff related to loans and, having when you need to have collateral and all sorts of technical stuff that you don't really need to know. But the point is that the code in its current form and in the amended form is trying to make it possible for central bank digital currencies to be used, even though they don't exist. Now, that's especially strange given the fact that this is state law, okay? So you have all these states all across the country. There's 20 some odd states right now that are looking at this UCC update. All the states have the existing UCC already in place that have some of these problematic provisions in it. A lot of states, most states are red, and they don't want a central bank digital currency. Yet their code is written to account for a central bank digital currency that they don't want to happen, and that doesn't exist. So the question is, why are you putting things in your code that help make a central bank digital currency run smoothly in the economy when you don't want it in the economy and it doesn't exist in the economy? It's right. Insane. And so once we, and there's a bunch of other groups, Club for Growth is another one, and State Freedom Caucus is another group that's been working on this. Once we started alerting lawmakers to what was going on, there was this huge internal battle in a number of states over this question of, should we just update the UCC as it is currently? Should we revise it? Should we just kill the amendments? What should we do? That's been the big fight that's been going on in all these states across the country. And in South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem vetoed the legislation that had been passed there overwhelmingly by Republicans for this exact reason, because of many of these concerns. And Ron DeSantis just recently came out earlier this week, I believe, and said, don't even try to send that to my desk. I'm going to veto. There's no way I'm going to accept a UCC code that does anything to promote central bank digital currencies. In fact, we should put laws in place that explicitly say that Florida doesn't allow for central bank digital currency. So he goes even a step further. And now you've got lawmakers in Texas that want to do the same thing. You've got lawmakers in Tennessee that want to rewrite the existing code so that that's better than so that we're not just denying the amendments that are coming through the door, but we're actually fixing the problems with the existing code that allow for central bank digital currencies. And so there's all these fights surrounding that about whether this is bad for cryptocurrencies or good for cryptocurrencies. That's actually not the focus. The focus is that the code, that states should never put things into law that are going to help make a central bank digital currency happen. Right. And that's exactly what the big push against this is right now.
See, and this is the thing. And I said this when it comes to the whole Great Reset and the ESG, where they had all these foundations that were built up when nobody was paying attention. And then it was all of a sudden everyone started talking about ESG and everyone started realizing, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And then it became front and center for the on the minds of conservative types that wanted to push back against this. And this is the same exact thing. This UCC thing, I saw a tweet from, I think, Texas Governor Abbott. This is from 6 months ago. It was a tweet being like, I signed this UCC thing into law. It's going to be great or something like that. And I'm sure that he did that out of just this idea, like I said, that it was just, a rubber stamp. Nobody even cares what this is. Let's move along. But now that this is becoming a thing that people are aware of, this potential of a digital dollar that has really shined the spotlight on these foundations that are trying to be built up underneath the radar, and they're exposing it to a point where these people who have big political sway are doing something about it. So yeah, Justin, you already mentioned that the South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem vetoed it. She was on Tucker Carlson talking about exactly why she vetoed it, and she actually did a really good job of explaining it. And I say actually because it's kind of a difficult topic area to explain in a concise way when you're on a 3-minute clip on Tucker Carlson. But she did a really good job of explaining that. And then, Ron DeSantis coming out and proposing some bill that would explicitly prohibit CBDCs in the state. And that's like a guy who could be running for president soon, where this is front and center on his mind. No, we have to take a stand against this. And then I just saw Ted Cruz introduce his legislation to prohibit the Fed from establishing a central bank digital currency. So the fact that these people are talking about this and that this isn't something that's flying underneath the radar anymore is an incredible sign. Incredible sign. Jim, Chris, you want to respond to anything that we've said so far about this?
No, I'm just learning. I'd like to hear Chris there in the darkness in the dark lower right panel.
Yeah. So Donnie, I recently wrote about Ted Cruz, proposing that bill. He actually proposed the same bill last year too, but unfortunately, the odds of that going anywhere are obviously zero because Biden would veto it. So I think at the federal level, we can hope that in 2024, if DeSantis or Trump or someone likes that does win, that they would actually consider signing such a bill, because if they could outlaw it at the federal level, I think that would really put a crimp in this. But in the meantime, I agree with Justin. I think that UCC code needs to be thoroughly examined, and that governors should not sign off on anything that would further enable the implementation of a digital currency. But I also think that the United States, the people, we the people, need to make our voices heard about this.
Right.
And I think that like we've outlined so many reasons why you should oppose this. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this could go so far down the rabbit hole, and this could lead to all sorts. I mean, like you guys said, this could lead to a social credit score system, just like in China. And Donnie, one of the things that I've been watching the past couple of years is how these payment processors, especially like the major credit card companies, are already in the business of doing this with, under the guise of the banks.
Right.
So I think that this would just actually further alleviate that, that middleman, which to some degree we can hope, bows the pressure from people. Because if the payment processors, or if like your local and mid-sized regional banks are no longer part of the picture, well, then that means that it's going to be total consolidation of the entire banking sector. And I think that that's what we are seeing playing out before our very eyes. And I think that, I'll take this back to 2008, 2009, when, we had too big to fail and had a bunch of big banks gobbling up a bunch of bigger, smaller banks. I think we're about to see that happen again. And I think that, when the dust settles, we could be left with Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citi. And, those are the big four. And I think that would also make it much easier for the government to roll out this CBDC, because they could do it under the guise of, well, we're partnering with the banks to do this. Yeah. And then, they could, whenever they want, take the banks out of the equation there, and then we'd be stuck with this digital currency. So I think that the environment is very ripe for something like this to happen. And I think that it is incumbent upon the people to push back against this at the state, local, federal, whatever level possible. Just don't allow this to happen. Do whatever you need to do.
100%. I mean, when ESG was, I mean, we started talking about ESG maybe before anybody here on this podcast. The Heartland Institute's been pushing back at it in every way we can. And we specialize in communicating to state legislators. And, ESG is a global phenomenon, right? Yet state after state after state took a stand and said, no, we're not going to participate in this whole ESG garbage. And, one state then follows another, then follows another. And now we see that some of these big investment houses are kind of backing up from ESG, or at least saying they're backing up from it. And I think the same thing can happen as global as a central bank digital currency could be, if, like, starting right there with Florida, if you start taking some stands, you slow the momentum for it. These things are not necessarily inevitable. And you may think you are powerless, but you are not. And states are also not powerless in this regard. And so if you don't take a stand, we will get run over. So you have to stand up.
Yeah, the only reason that Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz are talking about this stuff is because people that are like the people that are talking on this podcast or listening to us talk on this podcast are talking about it. That's the reason that they're paying attention. Justin, we are about to hit the 1 hour mark here, but just very briefly, can you just kind of outline kind of the next steps in this in two realms? One, kind of the fight against it, and two, like the path that it could take to actually becoming a reality?
Yeah, so the main thing that we need to do right now, at a federal level, what we need something along the lines of what Ted Cruz is proposing, but that is not going to happen while Joe Biden is president, and it's not going to happen. It might happen with the current constitution of the Senate, but it definitely won't happen while Joe Biden is president. So that's something that's we're just building momentum at the federal level for that. At some point in the future, I think we're going to have to deal with that at the federal level. We need to continue putting public pressure to make this a national issue so that presidential candidates take this on and make this a big thing, because that's ultimately how this is going to get done, is if a presidential candidate says this is a top priority for me and I'm gonna run on this. This is part of the platform. And then, of course, they have to win, but that would be a big part of all of that. At the state level, though, what lawmakers can do right now is they can go through their entire code, not just the UCC, but any other part of their code, where there is an allowance for a central bank digital currency. And it isn't always clear that that's the case. But if there are not guardrails that keep the central bank digital currency stuff out of their state codes, then they, as states, have every right to do that, to change their code so that a programmable, trackable, malleable CBDC cannot be used in a bunch of different kinds of commercial transactions and other things that are relevant to states specifically. That will go a long way toward throwing a stick into the spokes of this whole thing, and making it much more difficult for a CBDC to be rolled out in the future. You're not going to be able to totally stop it at the state level, but you can protest against it. You can make it harder for it to happen. You can say, nope, not in this state. We're not going to tolerate it to the best of our ability. And that's what lawmakers are starting to do on the UCC front, but they need to go through the UCC and purge it of all kinds of other problematic aspects related to this and other things, as well as a whole bunch of other state laws. Frankly, a lot of state lawmakers have kind of fallen asleep at the wheel when it comes to some of these more technical commercial transaction laws and things like that, financial laws, because it's really hard to understand them, and I totally sympathize with it. But now we're seeing how not paying attention to those aspects of the code that are not exactly sexy can lead to really big problems with other things that are important issues like a CBDC. So you have to take all of this stuff seriously. And the good news is I've heard from many lawmakers all across the country in a whole bunch of different states, including some liberal states, where they are starting to take that seriously and they really want to do something about this now. So that's just absolutely fantastic. We're going to win on this issue, I think, in the short term, and hopefully in the long term too. A lot of that will come down to the president. But I think that if we can make a big push for this at the state level, we got a good shot in the next, say, 2 to 3 years of really making a huge impact on this.